What's going on? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to talk about of how I believe that Ian Garry is going to have a really tough time with the top five in the UFC welterweight division. I want to break down some possible fight matchups between everyone and tell you guys why I believe that Ian Garry is going to have a really hard time becoming a UFC champion. Let's get right into the video. If you guys enjoy the content I make, please leave a like and subscribe. Subscribing is the best way to support my channel. 99% of viewers who watch my videos are not subscribed, so please, if you enjoy the content, subscribe. And while you're down there, turn on the post notifications just so you guys are notified when I drop a UFC content breakdown or news video. So let's get right into why I believe that Ian Garry is going to have a really hard time with the UFC top 5 welterweights. Okay, so Ian Garry is currently the number 7 ranked welterweight currently in the UFC welterweight division, and above him is Gilbert Burns, Jack Della Maddalena, Colby Covington, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Belal Muhammad, Kamaru Usman, and obviously the champion Leon Edwards. And most of those fights, I think Leon Edwards is going to have a really hard time dealing with. I think he can beat Colby Covington, and I think he could beat Jack Della Maddalena. I think Jack Della is one of the highest IQ fighters to where he has great takedown defense, but when you put him up against some other of the best strikers in the UFC, it's going to be really hard for him to win a fight. But he just defeated Gilbert Burns, who is someone who I think could truly beat Ian Garry if they weren't friends. Obviously, those two aren't going to fight. They used to train together at Kill Cliff FC in Deerfield Beach, Florida, and they share information with one another. And Gilbert Burns is one of the biggest driving forces in helping Ian Garry grow his career. But looking at fights between Shavkat Rakhmonov, Belal Muhammad, Kamaru Usman, and Leon Edwards, I do not think that Ian Garry can win any of those fights. First, let's start with Shavkat Rakhmonov, and Shavkat I think is going to be a future champion. I think Shavkat beats any one of those other 3 fighters that I named just because of how well-rounded he is, how much of a savage he is inside the UFC octagon, of how his striking is amazing, of how his grappling is amazing, of how Shavkat takes every single little thing in the UFC octagon and has perfected that craft. You look at that Wonderboy fight that he had a bum ankle and he absolutely submitted Wonderboy in 2 rounds. The Jeff Neal fight, he that bulldog choke on Jeff Neal, which was one of the sickest finishes I've ever seen in the UFC. And you know Shavkat's record. He is currently 18-0 with 18 finishes, and he has no decisions in his record. So I think that Ian Garry would have a really hard time with Shavkat Rakhmonov. Going to Belal Muhammad, I think Ian Garry, this would be the most favorable matchup for Ian Garry in the UFC top 3, but I really do think that Belal Muhammad's grappling and his better striking ability is going to be something to really get him to the ground and really endorse the ground and pound on to Ian Garry. Belal Muhammad, I think, just gets Ian Garry to the ground and just perfectly puts him into a position to where he can take advantage of him throughout the entire fight. And I think that Ian Garry ends up losing that fight too. And obviously, Kamaru Usman, I think, is one of the most well-rounded fighters in UFC history. His striking, his jab, his wrestling, one of the best collegiate wrestlers and wrestlers ever in the UFC. And I think that he gets taken down and controlled and ground and pounded on. Leon Edwards gets ground and pounded on by Usman, and Leon Edwards being the cleanest striker currently in the UFC. Maybe one of, if not the best strikers in the UFC, absolutely picks apart Ian Garry on the feet, and Leon Edwards has takedown ability, and I think he could go in there and take down Ian Garry too if times get really rough. But Ian Machado Garry is going to have to either really fortify his strikings, his weaknesses as a striker and his openings, or he's going to really have to work on his takedown defense and takedown offense to beat someone like this. Shavkat is going to be probably going to be the hardest fight in that top 3. Or of those 4 fighters, just because of how well-rounded Shavkat is in that way. I can definitely see Ian Garry beating Belal Muhammad. I could see him beating an older Kamaru Usman, and I do not see him beating Leon Edwards right now, but he is going to be able to compete with those guys, and I do think it's going to be a great fight if he did fight those guys. Not saying Ian Garry can't win. I just think that those chances of him fighting those top-ranked guys are going to be really hard for Ian Garry to win. Ultimately, Ian Garry can beat, most likely out of the 7 ranked opponents above him, I think he beats 2 of those guys, and that is Colby Covington and Jack Della Maddalena. And I think he loses to Gilbert Burns, and that fight will never happen, but I think he loses to Burns. I think he loses to Shavkat. I think he loses to Belal, Kamaru Usman, and Leon Edwards. But ultimately, Ian Garry still has time to improve before he's got his next fight. He just fought at UFC 303 like 2 weekends ago. So he's still got a lot of time before he really challenges one of these top-ranked contenders in the welterweight division. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of what I believe that Ian Garry is going to have a super rough time with the UFC top welterweights above him, and why I believe that Ian Garry isn't going to be champion right now and of how he has to improve his game. If you enjoy the UFC content and you agree with this take, please leave a comment down below. And if you don't agree with the take, please leave a comment down below and tell me what you think I could do better. While you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe, and also turn on the post notifications to get notified whenever I upload a video. And I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.